All right, Molo Sanbonani, hello, how's it? Shalom, good evening. Welcome to another episode of Liberty and Friends. Hey, as we are trialing new equipment here tonight, so if the show isn't as smooth as it usually is, do forgive me. We're trying to improve the quality here at Liberty and Friends and really on the BDL show. Molo, welcome to it. My name is Sikhle Ngobese, aka Big Daddy Liberty, and as usual, on Liberty and Friends. Your favorite fat boy, Big Daddy Liberty, is not alone. The house is packed tonight with the Friends panel who will help us analyze and break down the news week that was, providing that compelling analysis you will not get anywhere else. Welcome to it. This is the Liberty and Friends show for the 20th of March, 2022. Welcome to it. My name is Sikhle Ngobese. In a moment, I will bring on the Friends panel. And again, apologies to you guys. I am trialing, as I said, new equipment. So if you see me looking down this way every now and then, it's because I'm looking at the little monitor screen that I have. We'll improve things. We are building it as we fly it. Welcome to it. This is Liberty and Friends. As usual on Liberty and Friends, we have a panel, as I mentioned. Let me start bringing them on. The host of the Conscious Caracal, podcast, and really Conscious Caracal himself, who you'll find on social media. I'm talking, of course, about Upra Ernst van Zyl. There he is on screen. Ernst, good evening.
Goeienaand, Sikhle, unjani.
I am a brother. I am very good. Kanthan Pillay, welcome to it. Good to have you on. Another chap who I really enjoy conversing with is a writer, columnist, and really all-round media guru. I'm talking, of course, about Upra Kanthan Pillay. Kanthan, good evening.
Sabona mfowethu.
Hey man, y'all hit me the Zulu tonight. Okay, yeah, good evening, welcome to it, Kanthan. Super appreciate seeing you on the show. Another host, a co-host of a very popular podcast, at least here at the BDL show. We love the work that they put out. You'll catch them every Monday at 7 p.m. I'm talking, of course, about the Manpatria podcast. Joining us tonight is Koketso Resane. There he is on screen. Koketso, good evening.
Yeah, good evening. And being the only Setswana speaker here, I'm obliged to greet in Setswana. So, ke le dumedisa lotlhe ka kgotso, kopa le ntshwarele as a belief some Afrikaans there.
I was about to say, you hit us with a little bit of a mix there. I like it. Khotsontate, welcome to it. And of course, last but not least, or not last, I'm just waiting on another guest who might be having some technical difficulties, but last on this current panel at the moment was Bheki Mahlobo from the Center for Risk Analysis. Bheki, good evening.
Hi, Sikhle. Thanks for having me on. Hopefully we have a great chat today.
Absolutely. With a panel like this one, I can imagine it will be exactly that. Let me just keep an eye on the comment section. The comment section being important, of course, because you, dear viewer, are part of the show. So welcome to it. Your comments will be flighted on the screen throughout the course of the show. Welcome to it. Remember, though, as I always say, your only price of admission here at the Big Daddy Liberty show on any of my shows is to hit that like button. Do it now, especially if you're watching this simulcast on Twitter, Facebook, or on YouTube. Welcome to it. Let's get straight into that conversation. Guys, the week has been one of an interesting one indeed. And tonight's show will delve a little into the international news sphere, which has kicked up some very interesting stories. Let me begin, I'll begin here, really. And I was really hoping to have Gabriel Crouse, just for the sake of the viewers, who will be our last friend who appeared tonight. I'm sure he'll come on at some point. But let me kick it off here. Guys, it's been another week of this Russia invasion of the Ukraine. Lots of dribbling and, lots of propaganda on both sides, coming out throughout the course of this week. But there's one area that I really want to zoom in on in this particular episode, just as the hook for this particular part of the topic. And as I go to my notes here quickly, bear with me, chaps. It's these the Azov Brigade, which are effectively neo-Nazi characters who find themselves being warmly welcomed in the Ukraine national forces. Now, here's why this is an interesting one for me. On social media this week, I made an issue of this, and I said I find it complete. Again, as a human being, as a Jew, as a South African, I find it reprehensible that there seems to be a tolerance on the Ukrainian side of things of these particular characters. Now, one can argue, for instance, as I had people argue to me, well, it's a wartime situation. You can't pick your friends, as is the common retort, or a flat out denial in some cases, in most cases. Oh, no, they said, these are not neo-Nazis. Neo-Nazis don't exist. In fact, the president, I often hear being thrown at me, is a Jewish man. How could he accept neo-Nazis in this particular conflict? Or the third one, and Kanthan, I'll come to you. No, Big Daddy, you're pushing Russian propaganda. This is Putin propaganda. Stop it, BDL. But where is the truth here, especially when the Western media itself a year ago was admitting openly that these guys are part of the Ukrainian armed forces? Kanthan? Kanthan, I've got you on mute here. Okay, let's see if we can figure that out. Kanthan, you're on mute. We can't hear you. Okay. Whilst Kanthan is maybe trying to sort that out, maybe let me throw the question to someone else in the meantime. I'm not sure what's going on. We're having a little bit of a technical glitch here, but that's okay. It happens. Koketso, I'm going to come to you because I don't know if you've been engaging people on social media on this particular issue, but there's something weird about the dribbling and distracting you often get when you question, for example, the Ukrainian side of things. And almost
apologies for that, guys. I managed to get it sorted out.
We can hear you. Go ahead, brother.
Yeah, no, look, let's just basically, cut back to the chase, which goes back to the time of World War II. And World War II is basically the source of the stuff that's going down right now, because we had just in Ukraine alone, and this is the western part of Ukraine, which is, Kiev and kind of westward from there, that there were more than, of the millions of Jewish people who were murdered during the entire Nazi reign of terror, 1 million of those were murdered in Ukraine. Yeah. And the crucial part is that there were more than 100,000 Ukrainians who joined the Nazi death squads. So, just to put the numbers in perspective, you have more than 100,000 Ukrainians who joined the Nazi death squad. But more importantly, there has not been a single prosecution of any Ukrainian, nor has there been any investigation into war criminals, or has there been any persecution or prosecution of Holocaust perpetrators. And you can double check that with the Simon Wiesenthal Center. For those of you who might think that I'm spotting Russian propaganda on this point. When the Germans invaded the USSR in 1941, which of course included Ukraine at the time being part of the USSR, you had Ukrainians who welcomed the invaders with Nazi flags and with banners, kind of much in the same way as went down in Austria with the Anschluss, where the locals pitched up in their numbers to show their support for Hitler and the stuff that he was doing. So consider that from the time of World War II, and I think all of us around the world are fully aware of the fact that there was a systematic hunt to try and track down all of the perpetrators of genocide on the part of the Nazis, except for Ukraine. And the reason why that was the case is because the Ukrainians were actually given a free pass based on the fact that the Americans basically said, we're going to let you have a free pass on this. Why did the Americans do this? I have no idea. But to this day, when Putin talks about stuff like this, remember that Putin, in terms of his own family, had significant members of his family wiped out by the Nazis. So Putin, exactly like most Israelis, has a really profound sense of disdain for the Nazis and goes after them at every conceivable opportunity. And all of the genocide that has, and I'm using that word very carefully, and because I do consider it to be genocide, because it has been very systematic action against people in the eastern part of the country by the people who are currently in power in Ukraine. And because of that, and the entire narrative that goes around that has been exactly from the Nazi playbook. It has been around the question of racial purity, because the idea is that the Ukrainians consider themselves to be a purebred race as opposed to the Russians, who are basically a melting pot, like the rest of the world. So Azov is certainly the predominant military force right now. And certainly if you look in terms of what has been happening in Mariupol in the past week, the reason why there has been systematic targeting of Mariupol is precisely because of the fact that these are the guys who are fighting there on the ground. And I say all of this on the basis that, no, I am not a fan of Putin, okay, because I do not want to live in a country that does not have a free press, where, you know, people do end up getting executed in the dead of night. All of these things we know. But it just so happens that in this particular case, all of the stuff that has been coming out of the Putin camp in terms of the Nazis and neo-Nazis, these are not neo-Nazis, guys. These are actual Nazis that are left over from the time of World War II. So let me stop at that point.
And again, it frightens me, the level of almost a knee-jerk reaction to any suggestion that, look, there are bad hombres on all sides of this conflict. There are multiple players involved in all sides of this conflict. Instead, Koketso, a knee-jerk reaction online that you must take the Ukrainian side, you must take the Zelensky narrative, because if you don't, you're a bad person, you're a Putin agent. In fact, I've been called a Russian agent online.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate as well that, you know, especially for those of us who are literally on the other side of the world, I could say, yeah, there's definitely I'd say a largely media-driven narrative for anyone and everyone to come out and pick a side. You can't even watch your favorite sports team play without having to see which side they're picking out on. But I think it's actually important here that, you know, we stay true to the facts here, you know, and unfortunately, where we are right now, coming across the actual facts is proving more and more difficult. What is becoming more easy, I would say, is, you know, coming across what is essentially hate towards Russia, hate towards Putin. And there's plenty of excuses that is actually given for that. But for me, that just, it smells like there's a cover up of some sort. You know, while other things are happening, we are effectively being conditioned to just focus our attention on hating Russia, on hating Putin, on picking a side that is the side of Zelensky and the Ukraine. While there are other things happening. There's a funny stat that someone put out saying that, you know, there's actually quite a lot of people in the country of Ukraine. And with all that many people, and, you know, the modern age of cell phones, etc., why is it that you'll really come across in the mainstream media actual footage that is cell phone footage from ordinary people on the street? Why is it that you can't find that footage? Why is everything that you're seeing almost curated by quote unquote journalists on the ground who are effectively insisting that they are giving us the tried and true update of what's actually happening? Why do we not hear the voice of ordinary Ukrainians in all of this, especially those in areas that are really seeing the brunt of the war? And it does really tell me that there's definitely propaganda at play here. And again, this is not to say that I'm picking one side over the other, but you have to consider that in this modern age, it's not like before where we really depended on radio and newspapers to tell us what's really going on. You can simply log on online and see for yourself, but you really don't see what's happening from people in Ukraine. Instead, you are seeing selected accounts that is pushed by the media to tell us what's really going on. And you have to ask questions, because this isn't a first-hand account. It's a third-hand account that is someone reporting on what someone else supposedly told them. And for me, we have to raise a lot of questions on there. I do also like what Kanthan brought up, that is just because Hitler died and a lot of people were put on trial for their affiliation to the Nazi party, just because that happened doesn't actually mean that the Nazi movement as a whole actually went away. And I wouldn't be surprised then, like Kanthan is saying, that these are not neo-Nazis, these are actual Nazis. And if Ukraine ended up being a safe haven, like Kanthan mentioned, then I wouldn't be surprised if those who were looking to basically save their skin went off and traveled eastwards and basically took shelter in Ukraine, planning some sort of comeback. And now we're seeing them come out for the first time in probably many years. But yeah, there's a lot to be said there. There's a lot to be looked at. But of course, we know that no one's going to really do much of that work because we are all busy being hampered with, we're basically being shoved with this water down our throats that we need to pick a side. And if you're not, and if your flag isn't yellow and blue, then you're definitely on the wrong side of history. But let's see how it plays, I guess.
Again, guys, I must admit and openly state, nobody here is saying that we don't, feel sorry for the Ukrainian public. I've always said this, and I've said it from the beginning, that this is a politicians and the political elites who are driving this conflict. And it is obviously the citizenry who are suffering. And again, I say that on both sides. Imagine, for example, being an ordinary Russian citizen who maybe even hates Vladimir Putin, but now your life has been absolutely destroyed by the sanctions that have come through from the West. But again, let me not waffle on this one, because I've got my views, but let me not waffle on this one. Let me come to you, Ernst, because you just shared a little link with me now on the WhatsApp page. And can I just advise people not to share anything on the WhatsApp page because it makes a little pinging noise. I think that it does come through here on the show. Ernst, you shared this particular note. Two things I want to throw to you. There is a selective amnesia when it comes to the two, and I shouldn't say two sides. There's multiple sides in this conflict, but a definitely one controlling of the narrative, almost like we saw with the spicy cough, if I'm to be brutally honest, where you're expected to be on a camp, and if you're not, you're going to kill grandma, as was the case before, or in this case, you're a Russian spy. Are you a Russian spy, Ernst? Will you be joining me, comrade?
No, Sikhle, I'm not working for the Russians, even though that would be a very interesting turn of events. We'd definitely be living in a very interesting times. But yeah, I shared that link with you, and I'll give some context for the audience. It's a link to a news story on so NATO on International Women's Day shared a picture of a Ukrainian soldier, a female Ukrainian soldier, and she has a black sun insignia on her chest, which is pretty much a neo-Nazi symbol. And I just shared that link with you, Sikhle, so that you have a source for it, because a lot of people won't believe me when I tell them this. So just to make sure that you've got the sources. Now, when it comes to the situation, I think the two panelists before me have really covered the actual situation very thoroughly that you wanted to discuss here tonight. So I'm going to be giving my take on a more broader issue. And I think that's something that you did touch on. And that's the fact that propaganda is omnidirectional in this conflict. And I mean, this is probably one of the first conflicts where we've seen really in the internet's latest form, or like in the internet's current social media form, where we've seen this level of public participation, if you can call it, in debating the war, spreading propaganda knowingly and unknowingly, etc., taking sides. And for me, it's very simple. I think everyone should have a similar type of principle when it comes to propaganda, and is that you shouldn't be spreading propaganda knowingly, even if that propaganda suits your cause. I think it's something that's not only dishonest, but it's also immoral to do. You are spreading lies to benefit a specific cause. And I've unfollowed many accounts since the start of this conflict that shared some accounts that shared pro-Russia propaganda knowingly, without a shadow of a doubt, and people that were sharing pro-Ukrainian propaganda, and I know without a shadow of a doubt that they were doing it knowingly. And I can't trust those people. I'm not going to follow you anymore on social media if I see you knowingly spreading propaganda, because that means in the future, if I depend on you for information, you will share any type of propaganda that suits your narrative. So that pretty much just discredits me, you in my eyes. if you knowingly spread propaganda when it suits you. And it doesn't matter what the cause is. The fact that you are willing to bend your principles to do that means that you will do it in the future. For example, take farm murder, something that I care very deeply about, and all my colleagues at AfriForum care very deeply about. Even if I were given the opportunity to share a fake photograph of a farm attack or a fake video of a farm attack that would really get a lot of international attention and really focus attention on the issue of farm murders, I wouldn't do it, because it would be lying. It would be dishonest. It would be, even though it would be serving a cause that I support, it would still be doing it in an immoral fashion. And I think that's something that a lot of people need to take into account. And then something that I also find very interesting when it comes to this entire conflict so far is the fact that when you look at, for example, the conduct of some of the people in power, but also social media platforms, you see the double standards come to the fore now. I mean, when I read last week that Facebook is now allowing open calls for violence against Russians, they're making an exception for calls for violence against Russians on their platforms. I mean, that just shows you. I mean, I thought it was fake until I went to actually see the actual source. And I'm like, oh, this is real. And that's not the only thing. A lot of these stories coming out, I have to go double check because it just looks so bizarre. The tennis player Medvedev being forced that if he doesn't denounce Putin publicly, he wouldn't be allowed to take part in the next big tennis tournament. I mean, this is hysteria. This is not something that should be encouraged. This is the type of conduct of the bad guys throughout history. You're not on the right side if you're doing this type of heinous stuff. And then maybe just a last thought there. When it comes to a foreign conflict, something that is not on our doorstep here in South Africa, I think the best thing for us South Africans to do in this regard is to figure out what's going on, get the facts, not to choose a side necessarily like it's a football match. It's not Manchester United versus Chelsea. This is two nations with real reasons for doing what they're doing. Putin is not some two-dimensional fictional villain that's just doing it because he woke up one morning and thought he's going to do something evil. And that said as well, that also doesn't mean that the entire Ukrainian government is overrun by neo-Nazis. The thing is, I think as South Africans, we need to look at the conflict, and our responsibility as outsiders looking in is not to necessarily cheer on a certain type of policy or a certain type of course of action, but rather to make sure that we got the real facts and that we have as clear a picture of what's going on as possible. Because I know from experience, and I think many South Africans will know this experience, of people abroad supporting and advocating for policies at home here in South Africa without knowing the context, and supporting some of the most heinous and most evil policies here in South Africa because they've been fed a bunch of lies here from South Africa. And I think coming from that perspective, having seen this happen, where people abroad, having been fed a constant stream of propaganda, support policies like EWC, support policies like NHI in South Africa, saying this is what you need, this is what the South African people need, while they sit in Switzerland, the USA, and the UK, has kind of put me on a bit more of a sober position when it comes to advocating things in conflicts and countries that I don't understand, and countries that are very far away from me. And I think it's maybe a type of distancing that I would like more people to do, where you are an outsider looking in. Don't become too cocky or arrogant about the type of solutions that you are proposing for countries and conflicts that you only have a shred of understanding of. I think that a little more humility in this regard would actually go a long way.
Absolutely. And this is what I found. This is what I personally found to be absolutely stupefying, astounding, even when you even venture a comment on social media or you share some content on this particular topic. Someone will come at you with an aggression that almost has a holier than thou demeanor to it. Like, I know everything about this topic, and pish posh, Big Daddy Liberty, how dare you suggest that the Ukrainians are bad people in any way, or that the Russians don't have or Putin rather may have a rational reason for what he's doing, even if you disagree with the reason. You can't even venture any form of political commentary on this if you don't take a side. Gabriel has just joined us. Welcome to it. Gabriel, of course, is Gabriel Crouse, of course, is the head of campaigns at the Institute of Race Relations. Good to have him on. Gabriel will, of course, have been chewing on this Russia matter, just its latest developments, and really the hook, what began this conversation, were these chaps, these Azov battalion chaps who are avowed Nazis, as we've established, and really, as the media themselves have been saying in the run-up to this war, questioning why they are buddy-buddy with the Ukrainian administration. Now, questioning this isn't saying we're justifying the Russia invasion. Now, please, because I know it's going to happen in the comments, there goes Big Daddy Liberty, that Russian agent. But
agent.
There's something to be said here, Gabriel, about an almost denial by some people to just accept facts, basic facts.
Yeah, I think it is. It's so depressing that an issue comes along that some people like me have been following for years, since I was in Russia when the Kiev coup happened, the Maidan revolution. Azov Battalion was heavily involved in that. You know, John McCain was very happy about it. There were US diplomats that were sort of picking winners and losers about who should replace the pro-Russian democratically elected president of Ukraine at the time. I was in Moscow when the sanctions were first imposed after the coup and then the Crimean referendum, in which most people said that they would rather leave the poorest, most corrupt country in Europe and join a democracy which is far from perfect, but which is in a lot of ways much better off than Ukraine is. This was considered to be outrageous, not at all like Kosovo, not at all like, in terms of the coup, Panama or Haiti or Honduras or any of the places where the US had invaded after they had coups. I think that, and I've been following it since then, and I think it's very complicated. Now, maybe that's because I can't see the wood for the trees. Maybe that's because I'm too close. But I am amazed at how many people, as you say, Sihle, sort of can't tell you anything about Putin. They can't tell you his deputy's name, if he has a deputy. They can't tell you what constitutional reforms happened in the last couple of years. They can't tell you who the leader of the opposition is. They can't tell you Putin's wife's name, or if he has a wife, has he been divorced, does he have a mistress? They can't tell you any details, but they can tell you exactly what he's thinking. They can tell you why he decided to invade, what his mission is, why he decided to invade, when he decided. They're sort of mind readers with a penetrating insight that you would expect a mother to have when describing her son, you know, or a husband when describing his wife. In fact, more than that. And I think it's kind of gross, especially when people consider him to be pure evil, to sort of spend so much time thinking about knowing what he's thinking. And if that sounds abstract, let me give you a concrete example. I think one of the biggest news stories of the week, in a way, from the propaganda side, was that the Russians had a big rally in Moscow. Putin went to make a speech. And I saw this covered on CNN, Sky News, BBC, you know, all the things we still get on DSTV. Obviously not RT, because, like, it's too scary for people to see that. And I spoke with people, you know, political analysts, people who are very heavily involved in campaigning against the war and in favor of Ukraine, involved with some political parties. We've discussed this before. And once again, I just play this basic journalist's role by asking a simple question. You've told me about that campaign, that gathering in a stadium and all the flags waving. You've told me what was Putin thinking. You told me why he did it. You told me why he did it on that day and not on another day in terms of the propaganda campaign. You told me what he's hoping to get out of this. Tell me, please, what was the reason officially that day was chosen? And I haven't gotten an answer. But the reason was said, if you listen to the speech, beginning, middle, end, all the way through, right? This is the anniversary of the Crimea referendum. Of this moment in history where a supermajority of people said, we don't want to be in Ukraine, we want to be in Russia. And people said it was rubbish. that it must be, soldiers with guns coercing people to say that. But since then, Levada, a genuinely independent think tank in Russia, the Washington Post, a newspaper that is really not known for being pro-Russia, they've done their opinion surveys. They've found that the results match the referendum, basically. Legitimize the referendum. That moment, that little detail, it's not that it's debated. And I think that's what I'm hearing from the other panelists. If people want to debate, if they want to say, this doesn't justify that, go for it. Let's have that debate. I'm actually not sure what I think about a lot of these things, but maybe because I've been thinking about it for so long, I've lost my sense of perspective. Someone can come at me and have a robust engagement. I'm down with that. But I'm not seeing that. I'm not seeing that in the New York Times. I'm not seeing it on CNN. I'm not seeing it on Fox. I'm not even seeing that point addressed. It's just skirted by. The whole rally is covered without even mentioning what its basic organizing principle is. And that seems to connect with all the other bad behavior, with Facebook saying it's okay to scream hate against all Russians, with banning Dostoevsky, with banning Tolstoy, dead Russians, with, what are they going to do about this? With saying to a tennis player, Medvedev, like, if you don't pass a loyalty test, we're not going to give you the winning ride. We're not going to let you do your job. I mean, it seems crazy to me that people with so few facts to hand, with such a low level of curiosity, have such a high energy for imposing their will on others. And that's my opening spiel. My second spiel is very short, and I'll just say this. There's something very disturbing to me about the American intelligence agency, because I think that it's kind of my, it's the superpower of the world. It's got the greatest legacy of uplifting people from poverty, of taking a constitutionally democratic project forward. It's got a lot of flaws and a lot of problems, but its army beat the Japanese fascists and helped beat the almost single-handedly, and helped beat the Nazis. It set up South Korea, which is my man crush of a country. It's done so many beautiful and good things. The Marshall Plan in Europe, it really deserves a lot of credit, but of course there are problems. And one of the problems is this flippant old pattern of the American intelligence agencies, when they screw up, blaming Russians. And it kind of starts with McCarthyism, but the latest instance is this thing about the Hunter Biden emails, which have finally been verified, but are still being sort of denied by some. And the New York Post, the New York Post which initially published those emails before the election, which implicated, very important people in shady business. And the immediate pushback was like a letter from a lot of people in intelligence saying, there's no truth to this. This is all Russian propaganda. And subsequently, that story's kind of been walked back. So the Washington Post reaches out to a bunch of these intelligence agency officials and says, what do you think now? They reached out to 30, and their cover story on Friday was 30 spies who lied. And they publish the response from every single one of those people that they reached out to. And almost all of them are no comments, but some of them are like this. Just listen to this. Don Hepburn, former national security executive, now president of Boanerges Solutions Limited Liability Corporation. Okay, he's making a lot of money. Left the army, make money. Okay. My position has not changed any. I believe the Russians made a huge effort to alter the course of the election. The Russians are masters of blending truth and fiction and making something feel incredibly real when it's not. Nothing I've seen really changes my opinion. I can't tell you what part is real and what part is fake, but the thesis still stands for me that it was a media influence hit job. Dude, the key clause there is the Russians are masters of blending truth and fiction. Like, nobody else in the whole world likes to lie. Dude, if someone is telling you that culture they lie, that place they lie, not us, then that person has already blown their credibility, in my opinion. If any one of us starts to say, Zulus, they are liars. Xhosas, they are liars. It's not a serious person would never say that. Every culture, every country, every place has people that are going to try and get ahead by manipulation, and that includes America, it includes Ukraine, it definitely includes Russia. And so, yeah, just to echo the statements, what I think we can do as South Africans, because we're not actually in this fight, is try and lean back and tease apart the lies from the truth. And that is also real work. And good can come from that. It's not the same as shooting bullets. It's not the same as sending guns one side or another side. But there is something about looking for the truth and suspecting both sides and trying to seek out the contradictions that expose which lie is where and which truth is where. That I think is real work. And I think we're in a privileged position to be able to do that. Thank the Lord that we don't have shells falling on our head. Then your job is to try and find lunch and a bunker and all kinds of things that are very different. We are in a privileged position, so don't get too hasty about judging. Try and be suspicious.
Absolutely, and again, that's I can't begin to express this point and maybe even echo some of Gabriel's points, and indeed all the points made by the panelists here. People are so quick. Again, I hate to keep coming back to this, and I'll come to you just in a moment, Bheki, but people are so quick to take sides on this issue and forget that actually for a lot of us in particular, what's more important is the truth, number one. Number two, solid, quality, compelling political analysis on this issue, insofar as also how it will affect us. I have a former colleague of mine who, again, rest in peace to him, Ian Cruikshanks, who passed away last week. And I just want to extend my quick condolences, please, to his family at this tough time. But, Ian used to say this one thing, such a sage dude, when it comes to economic analysis and what does it mean for us? That was a very common term that Ian used to use. And again, my political analysis on this issue whittles down to exactly that question. What does it mean for us? Bheki, I want to bring you in here because I want to chew on the economics also on this issue, because that's where I begin to think the question of what it means for us becomes very pertinent. South Africa, of course, we know, does quite a lot of trade with Russia, and indeed we belong to BRICS as that conglomerate of countries, whatever the word is, to this particular issue. I don't know what your sense has been. I don't know if you've delved into the data at all. What do you see from this as an impact, if at all any, for us as South Africans?
Yeah, so the impact in regards to the Russia and Ukraine conflict has been felt through the Brent crude price, which has dramatically increased in the past 3 months. 3 months ago, Brent crude oil was sitting at about $68 per barrel. That dramatically increased close to 140 barrels to the dollar, and now it has come off a little bit to $100 per barrel. So we don't really do much trade with Russia. We do trade with other countries like China, the United States, and so forth. So Russia is actually not one of our main trading partners. However, the conflict has had an impact on global supply chain, which has had an impact on South Africa, for example, as well. Also, if you look at the price of wheat, these are bread and butter things, and so forth. That has dramatically increased since Russia and Ukraine are responsible for about 30% of exports in wheat. So that is where the South African household is particularly impacted in this regard. It's particularly impacted through their income levels, but through experiencing the price of fuel. It's estimated that fuel will now increase by 2 Rand, largely because of the price increase that I've mentioned earlier and so forth. However, it does look like that price is slightly coming down. And what's also actually been saving South Africa from a massive increase in the fuel price is actually what's been happening to the South African Rand, which has been holding steady because of the gold price. Interestingly, as the airstrikes were sent from Russia to Ukraine, the gold price shot up. And whenever you see the gold price shooting up, that somehow results in the Rand stabilizing and is favorable for the South African Rand. So some of that increase in fuel price will be offset by the current Rand levels. However, unfortunately, the theme of this year has been that of inflation, be it that of fertilizer prices, which does come from fuel prices and so forth, and as well as wheat prices. And unfortunately, that's where South Africa will be particularly hit from. The conflict between Russia and Ukraine, as I've mentioned earlier, will have a severe impact on global supply chain measures. It will take longer for things to be exported to South Africa and so forth. So that's where the South African household will be particularly hit. It will be more expensive to buy ordinary goods and services in this country going forth.
And again, I must lament this issue. I want to stay with you, Bheki, because there is a lady, I'll call her Wendy, because she calls herself Wendy, pardon me, on Twitter, who posted a photo this week of basically a basic food basket.
Yeah.
And she says, again, it was in the context. Sorry, I'm trapped by my own sentence construction here. Let me take 2 steps back. There was a debate on social media revolving the issue of where do you buy your groceries from, especially in light of what we can see our prices going up. Some people posting Woolworths prices, saying, "Oh, look at this basket; it cost me 1,000 rand." Others then posting other things, and Wendy's one is one that really maybe registered on an emotional level to me, because Wendy posts this picture of really what is a basic food items, maybe 3 little trays. What's it called, punnets or whatever the word is, of protein. I think it was like just a little bit of pork, some chicken and some beef, half a watermelon, and like basics big. It wasn't a juji, so to speak, basket. And she says, guys, all of this for 600 rand. But you could almost hear in the tone that she was saying South Africans need to get to a point now where you kind of maybe even have to start shopping around and being much more discerning around where you get your food items from. But I remember thinking to myself, can you just imagine the thought process behind this for the millions of other South Africans who don't post? The idea that actually your food basket is becoming smaller at either the same amount or if not paying more for those items. And here's what really got to me. Bheki, basics in this country are now becoming luxuries for many South Africans. And the politicians are not in that same basket, so to speak. For Bona, business as usual, same creme de la creme as usual.
Yeah, Sisha, there's a point that you touched on there in which you said the decisions essentially taken by governments is usually paid for by ordinary people in a particular country. So I say that the theme of this year has been that of inflation, but that's largely because of what's been happening over the past 2 years. We've never seen such stimulus measures that has been imposed in much of the Western countries, as well as here in South Africa, for example, the quantum of printing that we have seen so far, as well as the lockdowns, which has resulted in supply chain disallocations. And that has unfortunately resulted in the price of bread and butter to become more expensive for ordinary people in South Africa, as well as around the world. In fact, the United States inflation currently is sitting at about close to 8%, which is the highest it's ever been since 1982. Here in South Africa, it's slightly lower than 6%, but it's still recordly high when you're looking at the trend line over the past 10 years in the country. So these, unfortunately, are bread and butter issues, like you mentioned there, like, for example, getting the source of protein, being that of chicken, for example, dramatically increasing. I mean, anecdotal experience of this is that I buy chicken because it's the cheapest form of protein that I can get. For example, like chicken breast, and that has massively increased from about 50 rand per kg to now close to 70 rand per kg. That's a massive increase to which a lot of South Africans can simply not afford. Compounding that of other things that they need to pay for, such as that of transportation, for example. So I work solely from home, so I'm not necessarily affected by the fuel price, but I am affected by the transportation of goods and services, which unfortunately impacts on my budget. But as well, for the South African household that goes to work, that uses taxis, they unfortunately have to pay a steeper price for fuel prices. South African fuel price has increased by 40% December of 2021 compared to that of December 2020. That is a massive increase. And unfortunately, when you see such increases in food items, unfortunately, that results in, increase in riots and protest action, because people are starving, people are facing hunger.
Kanthan, I must come back to you because there also was a few questions thrown at you from the audience. Welcome to it. Remember, you are watching Liberty and Friends. You, dear viewer, are very much a part of the conversation. Keep those comments rolling through. I'm scrolling them, putting them rather on the screen, and you can scroll through them as you see them on your particular social media platform that you're watching. Welcome to it. This is Liberty and Friends. Hit that like button if you are enjoying the conversation. We are at the halfway point in the show. Kanthan, I must come back to you because, again, Bheki rightly paints the picture here that, yes, we can speak about this conflict and, speak about the abstracts of it, the geopolitics that happen at times far from us, but involving us to an extent, albeit, as Gabriel pointed out, we're not directly involved in this, but where we do see our involvement, of course, is in the price of things. So Bheki rightly pointed out that the inflationary pressure that the fuel price has placed on this obviously has that trickle-down effect. Another pressure that people aren't talking about, or we haven't touched on rather, but I'm seeing in the comment section here, and talks to me also as a farmer, is on fertilizer. Russia is a major exporter of fertilizer products to South Africa, is also in the market in that sense. Some clients, some farmers I've spoken to already saying, hey man, I've seen a rise of between 30 and 70% in the price of fertilizer. Doesn't bode well for food security.
No, it doesn't. But bear in mind as well that the price of fertilizer is going to be directly correlated with what is being commanded on the international market. And, South Africa actually produces a fair amount of fertilizer in our own capacity, but those are always going to need to be priced in terms of how much are we going to be able to get for it on the international market. So if you keep that at the back of your mind, that immediately at the point at which you take the single biggest supplier of a number of commodities out of the market, and remember that going back to the question of food security, Russia happens to be the world's biggest exporter of wheat and followed very closely down the line by Ukraine. So you've immediately taken a major food supplier out of the market simply because of sanctions that have been imposed by the NATO countries. And the overall impact of that is that you're going to have a situation where if you take our own food costs as an example, there is going to be a decision that gets taken at the level of every major producer of wheat supplies in South Africa in terms of, are we going to be selling it on the local market at our rand-denominated prices, or are we going to export it? Now, remember that we went through this major period where South African oranges became pretty much unaffordable for the masses. And this was in the post-94 period, because suddenly the international markets opened up for us, and all of those outspan oranges were able to be shipped outside the country. The idea that we are living in a globalized economy, and that at the point at which prices go up around the world, it actually impacts the stuff that we produce at a local level as well. So, consider maize, consider wheat, all of that kind of stuff. It's ultimately going to come back and bite us, unless we are having economic growth at the same time. So the crucial thing, Sishle, and we've spoken about this on this show before. If you have a point at which your economic growth is actually keeping pace with the rest of the world, you can afford to pretty much shrug off a lot of the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune that come in our way. But we don't have economic growth at a level where it should be. And we know that's largely because of the fact that we have a government that has imposed really disastrous things upon us. And of course, we're going to talk about that in terms of the state of disaster later on in the show. But all of those things actually add up. Fuel costs, the fundamental thing. Barely a month ago, when there was this cacophony of hysteria on social media about the fact that Shell had been turned down by the courts in their bid to actually explore for oil off the wild coast of the Transkei. And I can absolutely assure you that all of those keyboard warriors who are there have never been to the wild coast, because it's almost impossible to get to the wild coast because the roads out there are completely stuffed up. To quote Donald Trump, it is a shithole of note. And there's a double whammy that actually hits that part of the world, okay? The first thing that happens in that part of the world is that they don't have property rights, which means that the people who are there are actually not able to develop it and turn it into something that's going to attract tourism, which is going to bring people down there. But we're kind of getting off track a bit here, but it comes back to this basic thing. We were down the track of actually being able to produce our own oil supplies. And that would have been a good thing based on the fact that if we are producing our own oil supplies, that is money that is not being shipped outside of the country, and that's money that then can be poured into creating our own jobs back home out here. Now consider that just in terms of the price of fuel, we have systematically shut down the 3 biggest oil refineries in South Africa. Okay, starting off with the Chevron refinery in Cape Town, the Engen refinery in Durban, and now we are shutting down SAPREF. Why is SAPREF shutting down? SAPREF is shutting down because, remember, that has been run as a joint effort by BP and Shell for the longest time. BP and Shell have said they are pulling out. Why are they pulling out? They are pulling out because South Africa says that in order for Shell and BP to continue operating SAPREF, they will need to invest money in making sure that SAPREF's emissions are up to global standards. This will require $6.9 million in order to bring it up to speed. And, I'm just running the numbers in my head immediately. How long will it take to pay back an investment of $6.9 million? It's a non-starter. So Shell and BP have both said, we are pulling out of the country. Okay, so 2 knock-on impacts from that. Firstly, the cost of fuel gets to be more expensive because of the fact that we are now importing petrol and diesel directly as opposed to importing crude oil and refining it locally. The other thing is that all of the industries that were dependent on our refining crude oil locally, as in the chemicals industry, as in the fertilizer industry, all of these are byproducts of crude oil. And those jobs are vanishing overnight. We are going to see within the next year job losses of upwards of 50,000 as a direct result of that. And this is all due to the fact of poor leadership on the part of South Africa's government. So going back to your earlier point, Sihle, which is, how should we be engaging with what's going on in the Ukraine? Exactly the same way that we should be engaging with everything in every part of the world. It should be enlightened self-interest. What should South Africa be doing that is going to serve the best interests of South Africans going forward? And that's why, I go back to the fact that I've said in the past, if Israel has the best tech, we should be buying it from Israel. If Iran actually has the most feasible source of oil, we should be buying it from Iran, because that's in the best interests of South Africans. But unfortunately, we've been caught in this media-led cycle right now that says we must be fueled by outrage. And, I'm sorry, outrage is not going to put fuel on our table. Food on our table.
Or fuel in our cars to ride off of that. Guys, I must move us on to the next topic because I think, I'm just keeping an eye on time here. Remember, you're watching Liberty and Friends. My name is Sihle Ngobese, aka Big Daddy Liberty. We're in conversation with a very noisy lot here. I'm not sure who's rustling away there in the background. But we're in conversation with Gabriel Crouse from the Institute of Race Relations. He heads up their campaigns in that part of the world. Koketso Resane, of course, from the Manpatria team. You can find them on their social media, including their YouTube channel. Every Monday, the boys at Manpatria come to you. There is Bheki Mahlobo right there in the middle there at the bottom. Welcome to him. He's, of course, an analyst and economist from the Center for Risk Analysis. Ernst van Zyl, aka Conscious Caracal. There is next to me in the little box there. And of course, Kanthan Pillay, writer, analyst, and columnist, joining us tonight. Welcome to it, everybody. We're in nearly that last 30 minutes of the show. We've really taken a bit of time on this Ukraine one because there's so much dribbling on it. But I want to move us on to another issue that dribbles and distracts people. And that's the issue of in the US at the moment, there is a great furor around the issue of one trans athlete that is a trans woman. Sorry, I also get caught up in the jargon. I'm not sure what it is because it chops and changes sometimes. But this is a trans woman. That is a male who thinks he is a man, transitioning into becoming a woman who happens to be an athlete, a swimmer in that part of the world. I'm talking, of course, about Leah Thompson. Leah, of course, is currently embroiled in controversy in that part of the world because she has chosen to compete amongst biological women and is dominating the field. There's a current competition think it's an NCAA championship, a college-esque swimming competition, and she's just come in first place in that. This, of course, after having been ranked when she was a male swimmer in the 400s, coming in at 400 and something of the rankings. Currently now a #1 woman swimmer. Now, I must raise this issue insofar as at this particular swimming tournament, there is two very discernible voices. The one, of course, is the pro-LGBT, more alphabet plus community who are supporting Leah Thomas and are relatively vocal, but also there's been a large component of people who are there to protest against the presence of what they consider to be a man swimming amongst women. I want to show you a quick video clip of this particular issue to see exactly what some of those protesters have been saying.
Are you saying you think that his body is the same as the other girls in the pool?
Everybody is different.
No. Are you saying he doesn't have male organs?
So do you think that
Are you
everything
saying he doesn't have male organs?
I don't think that she. I think you're twisting words, and I think you have no idea. Actually, let me ask you.
Does he have? No, I'm a woman. That is not a woman.
Can I ask you a
That
question?
is not a woman.
Can I ask you a
Do
question?
you have ovaries?
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, go on then ask me a question.
What's that?
Ask me a question.
Are you a biologist?
Oh my god, don't be ridiculous. No, I'm not a vet, but I know what a dog is. You rely on stupid arguments because you don't have an argument.
No, I have arguments. If you let me speak, we can talk about it.
I'm not an astrophysicist, but I know what space is.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean you know how space works. I'm happy to have a real conversation with you if you'd like. If you want to have a
If
conversation.
you don't think this is going to destroy women's sports, if this is alright with you, then I'm sorry, but it's insane. Absolutely insane.
Well, there you have it again. I hope the audio was clear. I did try and clean it up a little bit in terms of hearing the arguments that, and again, I say arguments with a pinch of salt, because there's a point this woman makes in this particular exchange to say, as a protester, that, you know, the trans movement does not actually make arguments because they may not have an argument on the particular issue of trans women or trans athletes competing against what they would term biological individuals of a particular gender, whether it's biological males or biological women. Is there an advantage here of a trans, in this case, a Leah Thomas, over the female swimmers? Koketso.
Yeah, of course there is. I'm reminded of the instance where the US women's national football, soccer, aka football team. Yeah, I mean, they played, I think it was a bunch of 16-year-olds from some school, and they lost dismally. That is a professional women's national team losing by quite a margin to 16-year-old boys who are still in school. I think for me, that was the most demonstrable instance of, you know, the biological, I don't want to say superiority really, but, you know, the physical characteristics that really do give men in particular an advantage over females, you know, and even if you want to discount that example, there are some averages that could be looked at as well. The fact that men can hold their breath underwater for a little bit longer, men run faster. That there's even another stat apparently that Serena Williams, if she was to be ranked amongst the men, she'd actually make it outside the top 200 tennis players. That is, if she was to compete as a man, you know, so etc. etc. So there's definitely an advantage that for time immemorial, we didn't need to scientifically study this to attempt to disprove it. And based on that social acceptance, you kind of want to separate men from women so that you can celebrate women who happen to be very good athletes. Unfortunately, this new wave of feminism, if I can call it that, you know, after, of course, not being happy with the results of prior feminism. Remember, the first one being that women need to have the same rights as men. Two, women need to, also be on equal footing at a social acceptance level. That is, you can't pay men more than women, etc. Over and above that, they must have the right to vote and all of that. You know, now that all of that has actually been achieved, this new wave of feminism, with particularly feminists that aren't really impressed at what has been achieved thus far. They then coming around and saying, right, well, it looks like what we really want will never really happen. So perhaps it's time to change strategy and start then being a little bit more aggressive, and that is making men women as a way of equalizing the playing field here. That's exactly what's happening. And unfortunately, I mean, can you imagine being a legitimate born female who, as an athlete, you can never really, you might as well forget about achieving anything, getting a gold medal, etc., for as long as a man can wake up one day and decide that, right, I'm going to be a woman from here on out and I'm going to compete. And then, of course, over and above that, it has to be said that, what kind of loser wakes up one day as a man and decides that, right, John, Jake, Kagiso, Koketso, Ernst, and Gabriel beat me at our game here. So let me go and instead go after Taryn and Susan and Melissa, and it really takes a loser to end up doing that. And unfortunately, these people have actually been given a space to flourish seemingly at what they do. And at the end of the day, if we stand by and allow this to happen, it's going to keep happening, and you're going to hear more and more of these stories. I'm personally of the opinion that this is probably the worst generation of men that has probably ever existed, because it's men that have allowed this to happen. And I think with 6 gents here, maybe there needs to be further conversations to be had about how do we actually take back the position of men in society, and that is not allowing the worst of us to really take center stage, particularly in terms of taking advantage of women, of course. I mean, of course, we know that when men go to war, you typically keep the women and children aside, right? Well, judging by how things are going, even that's no longer sacred anymore. So there's a lot to be said about how things have actually become and where things are headed going forward.
Ernst, even as I come to you with this one, I must be quite clear here. This is where, as a freedom advocate, it comes out in me to say, look, I have no issue with someone who says, hey, you know what? I self-identify as X, Y, Z, whatever that may be. I have no issue in that individual saying, this is how I self-identify as an individual. And I don't think we should necessarily have a problem with that. But where I do have a problem is when that act, if you will, of an individual self-identifying in a certain way, then being translated as a mob, a particular mob, as we've seen, is the case in some of these lobby groups, trans lobby groups, as a mob, then saying our reality, subjective as it may be, must be the reality that other people are forced to endure. And if you don't, you'll be punished. In fact, we'll even use apparatus of the state to do that. Even at times when it is unfactual, what they may be saying, forcing people to embrace essentially feelings over facts.
No, Sikhle, it's I always go back when this debate arises of the biological differences between men and women. I always think back to that scenario where, for example, I'll be me and my girlfriend will be wrestling, and she'll pin me down on the ground, and I'm pretending like she's got me, and then my phone rings, and I just pick her up and put it to the side and answer my phone. And it's that's the type of thing that comes to the fore when you think about this stuff, is that there is a biological difference between men and women. That's something that we've come to this point where I can't remember who said the quote. I think it was G.K. Chesterton that said that there will come a time where everyone is the whole crowd is running towards the cliff, and the man running in the opposite direction of the cliff will be called insane. And that's where we are now, is that the people that are supporting absolutely unscientific stances, people supporting absolutely absurd stances, like, for example, that testosterone doesn't give you a massive boost when it comes to physical competition. The fact remains, as men, we have higher bone density, we have stronger muscles, we have better twitch fibers in our muscles. It just goes on and on. You get, and then if you stand back, and that's why I'm glad that Koketso brought this up, that this is largely men that let this happen, seeing as when we get to this scenario where you have female or trans fighters in MMA that are cracking their female opponent's skulls, this is where men need to stand up and say, no, this is enough. This has gone on far too long, and this has gotten to an absurd level where people are getting seriously hurt. And this is the things that the hard reality that people need to stand up against, that people need to champion, is the fact that some things are just true. Some things, whether they are uncomfortable or unfair, we need to stand up for what is true and what is real, the things that we know for a fact that are real. We should stop trying to just talk and think as if all that matters is the world that we want to live in rather than the world that we live in. We need to start talking about the world that we actually live in, not the world that we want to live in, where everyone is equal and everything is fine. And equality on all fronts is actually a thing, which is not true. When it comes to, for example, the differences between men and women, there is a scientific physical difference. And if you deny that, if you call me some type of radical for saying that, that just proves how far we've gone down this rabbit hole, where stating basic truths that anyone can recognize by just interacting with someone of the opposite sex or spending time around people of the opposite sex know for a fact to be true. When those types of things that you can see with your own eyes become controversial, then we're in a very dangerous position. When people start saying, don't believe your lying eyes, then that's where we are now.
And, I must come to Gabriel, then Kanthan, because Gabriel, I want to throw something to you on this particular instance. I want to go back, pardon me, to the arguments that were made by these protesters to say, actually, for them, it's about protecting, if you will, in terms of their argument, actual women's sports, because it seems in their view, and I think Adams articulates a particular point quite well, insofar as those contact sports, which is where also I actually physically am fearful for women who compete in these spaces, because it can. I know there was a fight. I'm just thinking back for a moment to a Joe Rogan episode where he makes reference to a fight in MMA of what was between a trans woman, someone who's born as a male, biological male, and an actual biological woman, and it was just a complete bloodbath, almost cringe-worthy. As
she
Rogan
cracked her skull.
Yeah,
I mean, here we go. Bheki says it. I mean, the injuries this woman endured, you could argue she would not endure comparatively if she was fighting another biological woman. So there's a danger here, guys. It's not an abstract topic, Gabriel. But sorry, let me whittle it back to a question. Is it right for us to just dismiss these people who say we should protect women's sports? Because that seems to be what's happening from the woke left, for example, of, what do they know? In fact, you hear the woke lefty in that debate saying, are you a biologist? That almost appeal to authority type argument, because they know they've infiltrated academia to be able to refer to say, biologists say this or the other.
Yeah, man. I look, it is a complicated thing. I think it's a complicated thing before you get to academia, for a simple reason, which is that it's good manners to not tell the truth sometimes. It really is good manners to sometimes just hold back on the truth. I take Ernst's point that we should be earnest and sincere and fully disclose things all the time. But it's actually good manners to hold back a lot of the time. So Sihle could squish me like a bug, like a small insect, okay? And there are a lot of men that I could physically overpower. But it would be rude and absurd for Sihle to start every episode and say, hello, this is Gabriel Crouse, who I could squish like a bug if he says something I really don't like. And if I were to say the same thing and so on and so forth. Physical force, the physical asymmetries between human beings are very much tucked away by civilization. So I'm wearing a jacket, I'm wearing a shirt. Everyone in this conversation is wearing clothes. We are literally concealing our bodies It's a precondition of entering a public space, more or less, to conceal yourself as a physical unit and to present yourself as a stylized thing. And I think that is good manners. And I think good manners go very far. And people like to say, when I went to high school at an all-boys school that included a girls' college, manners maketh man. But it's better to say, manners maketh the person. It's very important for us to tuck away some things. So to say that men in general are stronger than women, with some, there are long tails and there are some women that are more stronger than women, but that generically speaking, men are stronger than women. To say that, it's the kind of thing that there's a good reason not to say it. And I don't want to let go of that. I don't want to let go of good manners. Personally, I don't want to let go of the good manners of opening a door up for a lady. I think that's good manners too. And I think it's good manners sometimes to pick up the check, as the Americans say it, just because I'm the man and she's the lady. There are all kinds of things that are good manners, even if you fully unpack it, it seems like hard to justify. I don't want to let go of good manners. But there come political moments where you have to say the awkward thing in order to explain why the right solution is actually going to sustain some awkwardness, but it's going to avoid even more awkwardness. It's going to sustain some little bit of hypocrisy. It is slightly hypocritical to wear clothes, after all, but it is much better than the alternative of to go around and bullying everyone. And in that vein, the simple fact, which it's not polite usually to say, but which must be said, is that men generically are much physically stronger than women. And because it's impolite to say it, there's this universe of polite enforcers that have said, well, if you're not allowed to say that, then we can make a man turn into a woman and compete in sport and make lots of money. And the only way you can say this is unfair is to say exactly what that lady said in the interview, exactly what you said, Sihle, which is that the logical problem with allowing any old man to transfer to being a woman and then to compete in sport is that will erode women's sport. It will create an incentive to basically destroy women's sport, because men who transfer will generically outcompete the ladies, and it'll make it pointless for ladies to compete. To say that, you have to say something like men are superior. What was Koketso's line? I don't want to say superior, but it is superior. It's uncomfortable to say men are stronger than women. That is how this woke movement works. They find something that is uncomfortable to say, that we have a good reason not to say, that we as gentlemen, and I think we are all gentlemen here, none of us want to come out and say, hey, ladies, you should respect us because we're stronger. That is a horrible thing to say. And none of us want to come out and say it. Because we don't want to come out and say it, an entire movement has organized itself around the idea that someone can make money out of the fact that we as gentlemen don't want to say that. So the difficult thing to do is to say we're going to say it. It is true, and it is the good reason that men should compete separately to women so that women can have a space in which they can compete and actually achieve excellence in a domain that's protected. That's the first point. The second point is much shorter, and it's this. Mm-hmm. One of the commentators said something about connecting this to race. And I just want to quote Louis C.K. Louis C.K. said, the amazing thing is that apartheid, racial, BEE, affirmative action, all these kinds of racial segregation things, race is the stupidest way to separate people, because across races, we really are the same biologically. Aside from the very superficial stuff, we really are the same in terms of our thinking capacities, all the stuff that really matters. Gender distinctions, gender apartheid is going to last forever, because there really are quite deep and fundamental differences between men and women, starting with who gives birth and who does not, and who can never give birth. That is a huge difference. And yet we live in a society where you can transfer from being a man to a woman or a woman to a man, but you can't transfer from being white to being black or the other way around. It's completely crazy. It is, and that's why I spend so much time talking about manners, because I think the only way to explain it is that people are too polite to say the facts. And so I say, with Ernst, with Koketso, we must say the facts, but let's not let go of the politeness. We are only saying these facts because the situation demands it. We would never just go out and say men are stronger than women, because that would be an ungentlemanly thing to say.
Well, I could have said it better myself, Sishle.
Oh, I was hoping for a little bit of disagreement, but okay. But Kanthan, let me throw the question to you differently, and I want to pose it as a gender lefty would, and I want to see what your response would necessarily be. So a gender lefty would say, "Well, hang on, actually there is no difference." Pardon me, a gender lefty would say, "Actually, gender, pardon me, is a social construct." That's the argument they make. And because it's a social construct, it's quite reasonable and logical, they would argue, for one individual who was born with a particular gender to say, actually, how I'm socializing in society, I would like to believe that I'm, or think rather, that's the sort of terminology I always use or commonly use, that I'm a man who thinks I am a woman, because that's actually what it is, right? To be a transgender individual.
Feels, it's about feelings.
Well, feeling being central to it. But I wanted to grapple with this, Kanthan, pardon me. With me feeling this way as the lefty, the gender lefty, I am now demanding. I've formed a group, I've formed a lobby grouping. I am now demanding everybody else to see my existence through my truth. Another common expression you often hear from them, which means a school like Durban Girls High School, or I don't know what the equivalents are here in Joburg or whatever the case may be. How dare they call themselves Durban Girls High School or Durban Girls College? It must be Durban College or Durban High School, because I, Big Daddy Liberty, am now Big Daddy Libertina, and I should be in the school. Guys, shut up. Big beard and all. Look, with my Bin Laden beard, I should be in there because I'm Libertina and I self-identify this way. Now, again, I don't say this to make fun of people who believe this way, because I really think, someone who thinks there's something going on with them, and I hope I pray to God that they seek the help that they need. But this is an argument we're hearing, and there is now a demand from these sort of lobby groups that state force be used to enact something like this. Your thoughts broadly on this topic, Kanthan?
I first want to touch on something that Gabriel said just now, which actually resonates. And he said that we wouldn't say this because we're gentlemen, and it goes back to my most basic rule of life, which is don't be a dick. Mm-hmm. And don't be a dick basically means that if someone comes up to me and clearly has mental issues and says yes, admittedly that I'm 6 foot tall, I have a massive beard and I have broad shoulders and a narrow waist, but I identify as a woman, I'm cool with that. I will actually say, I'm not going to pick on the person and say, like you're a guy, just, like deal with it. So at that level, I tend to be extremely tolerant of whatever people want to identify with as themselves. I don't know what issues they're going through in their heads. Mm-hmm. The problem that we've got right now is people who are conflating ideas of feminism with what is now coming out from this trans movement. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the term TERFs, T-E-R-F, but it stands for Trans Exclusionary Radical Feminists. And the idea is that, they're people who back in my day used to be considered to be classical feminists, who were fighting for equality in terms of all of the things that to my mind actually matter, in terms of equality of opportunity, which is the most crucial thing as far as I'm concerned. And now suddenly you have a situation where there have been those hard fought for rights, but simply based on the fact that someone comes around and says, I identify as a woman and I'm now going to actually play in this space, it becomes problematic for me. Here, let me just summarize it into a couple of things that just, off the top of my head, come to my mind. If you were born a biological male, you never had to worry about where you were going to get sanitary pads from if you were going to school. If you were born a biological male, you never had to worry about the possibility of unwanted pregnancy coming from the fact that you had sex. If you were a biological male, you never had to worry about the fact that you ended up being subjected to honor killings, as they are called in many parts of the world. If you were born a biological male, you never had to worry about where you would go and try to find an abortion if you ended up with a pregnancy that you were not able to deal with. If you were born a biological male, you have not had to spend nearly all of existing human history fighting for the right to vote, which is what the entire suffragette movement was all about. Remember that women in most parts of the world have only been voting now for barely 100 years, okay, as opposed to the tens or hundreds of thousands of years that we've existed as a species. You never had to pretend, if you're a biological male, to be a man in order to study medicine. If you're a biological male, you never had to worry about the glass ceiling. And all of these are very real things. And if you are assuming that because of the fact that women have fought long and hard for all of those wrongs, and they're very clearly wrongs in my case, to be redressed, and you now want to climb into that space and say that you actually have a right to play in that space just simply because that's the way you feel, but you've never had to fight for that for all of human history, I have a problem with that, because you're actually clambering into a space that you know nothing about, because there is a history in terms of women actually needing to fight for those rights for the longest period of time. Then the other thing that I need to put across is the reason why we have gender-specific spaces is because they are a crucial part of our social interaction. The entire idea of what goes on in the locker room, or the reason why when you have people on double dates, why women will generally tend to end up going to the bathroom together, is because they are very important social constructs that actually kick in as a direct result of those spaces. It has been important for the development of us as a species for the longest time. And when we try to drive a truck through all of those things that have developed over the period of history without considering why those constructs were actually put in place to start off with, we're asking for trouble. So women's sports for me is, really kind of the tip of the iceberg. Look, there are some sports where women actually are better than men. And a very good example of that is long distance swimming under very icy conditions. Simply because when you look at long distance swimming, women are more aerodynamic than men when they're in the water. And because their fat layer tends to be subcutaneous around their entire body, they're actually able to maintain their temperature for longer periods. So this is why you have Russian women in the Arctic Ocean going smashing through the ice and going swimming in the dead of winter, just simply because they can. And I would not be the type of person who would end up doing that. But coming back to the question of trans sports, I would say that if Leah Thomas wants to identify as a woman, by all means, I'm very happy to hold open the door for you and all of that kind of fun stuff. But if you want to compete in women's sports, I have a problem with that, because the reason why we have women's sports is because of the fact that those biological differences are real, and they're still going to continue being real.
Well,
so does that answer?
I hear you, and I think on a lighter note, I would avoid swimming in the Arctic anyway, because next minute some hunter might think I'm a baby seal or a walrus in that mother. So I'm gonna avoid that. I'm gonna avoid that and stay alive. Guys, I want to move us on, and I say that even as I look at the time now, we've run out of time. So at best, maybe let me just quickly, and I'll get a thumbs up from everybody, hopefully, just another, let's say 20 minutes at best, and then we'll wrap it up. 20 minutes, and then we must wrap it up, because there's only two more issues I want us to chew on. Let me do the penultimate issue only because it's in the descriptor or the headline of the video. Gabriel, I'll begin with you because it involves you quite literally in this case. The Human Rights Commission, South African Human Rights Commission, that cesspool of nonsense, decided, hey man, we're a little bit bored. We're earning too much as state officials, and we don't have much to do. And yes, I'm being dismissive, Gabriel, but we need something to do. Okay, let's look for racism because that's South Africa's national pastime. Let's look for racism, and in let's see, checks notes, advertising. So in this instance, they're now looking for racism in advertising and holding hearings into this particular matter. Two people this week really made it in the news headlines when they gave their submissions. One of them is on the show, Gabriel Crouse. The other, of course, is Umbuyiseni Ndlozi. Gabriel, for me, please summarize Umbuyiseni's key submissions into this, including the whole argument he made, but please summarize. And I want you to get straight into your rebuttal and your points that you made.
Okay, so Dr. Ndlozi said that racism is so bad in South African advertising that the industry has to give 50 billion rand to Black South Africa. So that's great. To unpack that, he said all kinds of things. I'm going to have to paraphrase. He said, like, just being white necessitates that other people have to be Black, and that this means for the white people, it means taking an arrogant attitude, and for the Black people, it means being victims. Now, if you think I'm putting words into his mouth, I challenge you to go and watch his video and disagree, because he really does come out with this thing of saying it's necessarily a problem to be Black. Every day that you are Black, you are suffering. And the reason you are suffering is that at the same day, someone else is being white. So, in my opinion, this guy was advertising his own story, which unfortunately is much too popular in our political space. My rebuttal is very simply this. On South African television, South African radio, South African print, in the advertising space, we have nailed it, okay? The Human Rights Commission went and looked for all of the racist ads that it could find since 2013, and it found 0 racist ads, okay? It says 5 potentially racist ads were found in its terms of reference out of 80 million advertisements created in that period. We tracked it. 80 million, 5 out of 80 million, that would already be a win. That would be good, okay? If there's 5 racist South Africans out of 60 million racists, out of 60 million South Africans, if 59,995,995 are not racist and 5 are racist, we've beaten apartheid, truly. Okay, let's not let those 5 get in the way of claiming a victory. But even of those 5, none of them were racist, in my opinion. Why? One of them is a chicken licking ad. A chicken licking ad is being accused of racism because there's a Black dude sailing all the way to the Netherlands to discover that it's useless there, and he comes back and he prefers it back home. Okay? That's racist because it's making light of colonialism. Another one is a Dove ad where they're like, oh, a Black woman's turning into a white woman. That's racist. But then the white woman turns into a Hispanic woman, and the Hispanic woman turns into an Indian woman, and she turns into a Chinese woman, and she turns into a Black woman, and she turns into a Mexican-American woman, so on and so forth. It goes down. They don't mention that bit, okay? It's not a racist ad if you watch the whole ad. The hairiest ad, no pun intended, was the Clicks Tresemme ad, where the EFF called for an attack, and they went and looted and burnt places where people buy medicine. Old gogos were harassed. Why? There was this terrible ad which said white women have good hair and Black women have dry and frizzy hair. A few days before the Human Rights Commission convened, the Equality Court under Judge Dolamo found that ad was not racist, that it had been up for a whole year and no one had complained. Until someone had cropped it Because in the original ad, it said, oh, look, here's a beautiful white woman with great hair. Here's a beautiful black woman with great hair. Here's a white woman with problems with her hair. If you've got these problems, buy the shampoo. Here's a black woman with problems with her hair. If you've got this problem, buy the shampoo. In the original context, there was no racial problem there. No one complained until someone cropped it for social media and made a big problem. So 0 racist ads. If you go by the Equality Court and my own judgment of those 5 out of 80 million flighted advertisements in the last since 2013. Now, here's the amazing thing, Sihle. Advertising is an important fraction of the newspaper, of the news from 8 till 8:30 on SABC, and so on and so forth. The advertising space, we've nailed it. The advertising space is like ordinary South Africa, where our surveys show, and you and I know, most people have bad problems, and racism is not the bad problem. It's unemployment, it's increasing fuel hikes, it's flipping not being able to find a job, it's people it's all kinds of things. But yes, we're able to work together across races because our problems are so serious, we have to. And they've been so serious for a while. And we're human beings, and we know better than that stupid stuff. But in politics, in the politics section, in the op-ed section, in the section where fancy pants go and tell you what's wrong with this country and how we're going to solve it, where leading politicians are going to say where we're going to toy and what are we going to burn down. There, racism is the big issue of the day, all day, every day. I just had a things flight on SABC today for Human Rights Day, where I gave an interview to the SABC, and I saw the first comment when they put it up on YouTube was, "Yo, how could they let Gabriel there from the IRR? That guy just represents white monopoly capital." Okay, that's there I can see this person must know politics very well. He doesn't know the basic product problems that we have. Now, for me, it has been a very big week, because for the first time I was kicked out of a studio. I was kicked out of Power FM studio. And I'm very sad, because although I've disagreed with a lot of their presenters, we've always been very civil. But I was kicked out of their studio for just saying what I've said now. For saying that we should get a gold star. We should give a gold star to the advertising industry, because they they understand South Africans, and they're not being racist. They're not going out there saying, hey, if you're black, don't buy shares in this company because you don't deserve it, or don't flip and, our advertising industry is so far ahead of the curve. It's doing very well. Our politicians are so far behind the curve, they're still living in 1985. Our advertising industry is living in 2035. And here's the problem that I said, and this is the scariest problem for advertising for me in South Africa, is that with 2 million newly unemployed people, on top of all the previously unemployed people, everyone my age, Becky's age, Koketso's age, Ernst's age, sorry to Sihle, sorry to Kanthan, you guys are a different generation, but everyone our age, us 4 and younger, the majority don't have jobs. And because we've just been talking about gender, let me specify, young men in South Africa are majority unemployed. And that is just about the most dangerous, inhuman, wasteful, tragic problem in our country. And advertising does exacerbate that problem, because advertising puts it in your face. Look, there's a man who can take his girlfriend to the movies. There's a man who can buy a car. There's a man who can get a home loan from a bank and buy a nice house. There's a man who can drink a Bell's. All of these things are fuel to the fire. And I don't criticize that, because those advertisers are trying to sell to the men and women that can't afford that stuff. But it is fueling the fire of jealousy, of people that are living with a brick on top of their head, with the ANC and the EFF and COSATU and SATU and SACP pushing that brick down on their head, so that they can't buy the basic things that a young man needs to look in the mirror and feel like he deserves to be where he is. It's a very, very dangerous thing. this combination of a connected society in terms of visuals, in terms of YouTube, in terms of media, and a dislocated society in terms of the economy. It is a very scary thing to me, and it's the core of our work to try and put it the other way around. So that's what we try and do. We want more people to work and to feel less jealous. And we don't want to fight the advertising industry. They must keep selling the dream. But we have to make it actually realistic for people to achieve that dream. And unfortunately, it's very much the opposite. And that issue, to put it in those terms, is considered, unfortunately, so unacceptable that for the first time in my life, and speaking very politely, I was actually kicked out of a studio. I was told to leave for saying the problem with our advertising system is not that it's pushing racial stereotypes. The problem with our advertising system is people can't afford to buy the products that are being advertised.
Who was the presenter who asked you to leave, Gabriel?
Faith Magope. Faith Power Lunch. Mangope, sorry. Who's great. She's a fabulous lady.
I'll get to this in a moment, but I want to go to Bheki, Ernst, and then Kanthan, and then Koketso. I'm hearing feedback. Give me a moment, guys. There we go. Bheki, I don't know what your thoughts are here, but the point that Gabriel raised is actually quite an important one. Insofar as, we often hear the left rail about inequality and ascribe identity to it. But in real terms, inequality, which isn't the problem, but it can be a problem, if I can steal from ours lexicon on this particular issue, can be a problem when, as Gabriel rightly points out, that very same advertising industry actually faces or exacerbates an issue of those who are the economic outsiders and relegated to be economic outsiders by bad policy by the politicians, then looking through the glass window, so to speak, of society, almost like a kid at a candy shop who can't afford the candy inside, looking from the outside, from the glass pane. And yes, you'll notice as a young fat boy, that is a pain I did endure quite a lot of times. I'd look into the candy shop because I can't afford it, but that's the key issue here. Can't afford it. And it's that South African who, if anything, the advertisers are exacerbating that feeling of being alienated from society. Wow, I just quote Marx there. But there you go.
Sihle, if we were to take, let's say, assume that those 5 adverts, even if they were racist, for example, 5 out of 80 million adverts that were shown on TV or radio stations since we're in 2013 there, Gabriel, the probability that is 0.00001. I mean, that is absolutely amazing.
It's odd for the lefty.
Yeah, and this is the issue, like what Gabriel has rightly mentioned, that is in the political sphere, is that in the political sphere, racism is the core issue. It's not that the fact that South Africa currently has 12.5 million South Africans that are unemployed. It's not the fact that youth unemployment rate, which Gabriel has mentioned, sitting at 80%. No, those are not the facts. Not the fact that the average South African cannot afford, for example, what you mentioned there, Sihle, the products being marketed and advertised. Those are not the problems there, Sihle. The problem is that of racism. And this is the issue that I also face, unfortunately, when it comes to radio stations, particularly in Xhosa radio stations, as well as that of Zulu radio stations, is that you see a lot of this talk constantly. Whereas our Institute of Race Relation poll data suggests the opposite. The average South Africans agree that the common issues are such that of unemployment, the common issues are such that of crime, the common issues are such that of education. In fact, Gabriel last year, and I'm sorry to call you out here, Gabriel last year went on 702 and spoke on these issues. In fact, it was on 702 on the issue of that racism is not the problem. It is one of its, of course, racism is there, but it's not the biggest issue facing South Africans. In fact, is that of unemployment. And they outrightly dismissed it. They didn't want him to talk on this. And just 3 days later, what happened? The July unrest protests. And these are the issues not being discussed on radio currently. These are the issues not being touched by politicians because it shows their failures. That's why they deviate to racism.
And that was Clement Manyathela, if I remember that particular.
Yeah, that was him. Yes,
another prominent race grifter in the media space in this country. And I come to you, Adams, because that's what I want to focus and zoom in on for a moment. South Africa does endure the spectre within the mainstream or the corporate media, and of course within the political arena, of people who appropriate race as a means of a grift. It's something for them to use as a cudgel to beat the rest of society into seeing the world through their lens, which is, of course, a racial one, even though the data clearly shows time and time and again, and it isn't just Institute of Race Relation polling, Status polling shows much of the same. Ipsos polling I've seen them put out in this shows that racism is in the bottom of the barrel of what South Africans consider as to being the main issues that they face. But Adams, those race grifters got a grift.
Yeah, Sikhle, I'll keep my answer short here because I think that's what this issue deserves. I think the people that have come before me on the panel pretty much summed it up perfectly in regards to the issue that we were talking about here, and that's racism in ads in South Africa. Now, when it comes to ads in South Africa, I completely agree with Gabriel. I think our ads industry is on another level. It's been a while since I don't think I've ever seen an ad that rivals that one of Nando's, where all the ex-dictators are just running around and just are just best friends with, like, those were the days, my friend, playing in the background. And it's just Robert Mugabe in the end, the last dictator standing. But yeah, no, when it comes to this issue, really, when it comes to the issue of racism in adverts, I'm going to use the EFF's language here. It's such a bourgeois issue. It's such a middle class, upper middle class, university graduate trust fund baby issue. It's such a, when you look at South Africa, a country with the issues that we real issues like unemployment, inflation that's now on the horizon, there are hard times coming down the line for millions of South Africans as the world stands currently. Real hard-hitting issues that South Africans are going to be feeling not only on their plates, which will probably be empty for many of them regarding some of the issues coming down the line, but also issues they're going to be feeling in their health, issues they're going to be feeling in the quality, the real quality of their life and in the dignity of their life. Genuine, real issues that the majority of South Africans struggle with on a daily basis. The South African that's struggling to feed his family doesn't care about what was said in the latest Nando's advert. If you think he cares about it, you're probably an EFF supporter and you're probably a middle-class South African. That's what I always say about the EFF. It's not a working-class movement. It's a privileged movement. It's a party supported by a lot of privileged South Africans of all races. It's not a party supported by the working class. You know, I know that because I talk to people outside of social media. I talk to people on the ground. Do you know what they say? Hey, Julius, they hate you. They despise you. You disgust them. Another thing, if you really want to get some insights on what the average South African thinks about the EFF, go read some of the readers' letters in the Sowetan. I dare you. Go check out some of those letters that are written about the EFF and Julius Malema in the Sowetan on a weekly basis. It's really eye-opening. There was just the other day, there was one that was titled Malema's insults are an insult to our intelligence. And that was from a guy in Limpopo, in his home province, writing that about Julius Malema. And that's what you need to know about the EFF. It's a social media party, and it's a privileged party. It's not a party that is supported by the downtrodden. It's not a party supported by the working class. And that's just its facade. And like I said, every time you remind them of that, you'll see the insecurities come to the fore. Every time you remind an EFF supporter or an EFF party leader about the fact that they are not supported by those that they claim to fight for, you really see something snap inside them. You really see a visible discomfort come to the fore. And I want people to take a hammer and slam that nerve as much as you can. Remind them of that fact, because that's how you keep the EFF in their place.
A small note on that. I had a debate with Lee, I can't remember her surname, from the EFF on Newsroom Africa a week and a bit ago. Yeah, exactly. And she got to the point where she said, I was making the kinds of points we traditionally make at the IRR, and I think you're sort of echoing this kind of idea. And she said, you know, there are some black people that are willing to work with white people and even defend them. Coconuts.
Yep,
This
that's
is
the usual
this is-
refrain.
God damn it.
Let me come
I
to you,
reject
Koketso,
that.
because I think it's whittling to an interesting bit. And guys, I must be mindful of time, please. I know I said 20 minutes. But let's end the show at 10, please. But it really has to end at 10. I've never gone more than 2 hours on the show. You know, you and I will be targeted very, very viciously if we make these sort of points. You know, the usual. We'll be called all sorts of Uncle Toms and coons, house niggers, and the like. But there really is a pandemic, if I can steal from the last 2 years in this country. There really is a pandemic of a black elite in this country who are desperate to be the race victims that they weren't because they weren't maybe in the yesteryears of apartheid or colonial times. Desperate, Koketso, to be the race victims that they aren't, having gone to your St. John's or St. Stithians or Michael Houses of this world, living a life, if you will, of the very privilege which they project onto others as being a problem, but say nothing, having enjoyed themselves, with daddy being the CEO of ESCOM or the CEO of SABC. And now a prominent attorney, chairperson of a political party, sending me to Harvard, not Harvard, what's that one? Oxford, and blah, 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 blah. These sort of, I like to call them Blavity Blacks, Blavity being a US magazine for woke black millennials, people who appropriate their skin color to make arguments. But there really is a, if you will, pandemic of those individuals who are the loudest voice, not the largest voice, but the loudest voice, seeking to tell fellow black South Africans who disagree with them that you're a sellout, an Uncle Tom, a coon, because you don't see yourself as the race victim that they're desperate for you to be.
Yeah, the hard part now is in keeping this short. Yeah, I mean, look, firstly, yeah, I've been looking into it. I noticed the exact same pattern, particularly, I don't know, maybe it's got to do with how people were stuck at home and, you know, yeah, lockdown has now put front and center these type of people. But yeah, you're right in that. I mean, yeah, you and I, we get called names weekly, if not daily. But there's something to be said about people who, you know, yeah, they had access to maybe great education, great opportunities, and to basically make up for their own failures to be excellent or to be experts at whatever it is they want to achieve. They then come around and say that it is due to imagined atrocities of racism, usually academic racism. Failing that, it becomes corporate racism, and that's really the line that's towed by the left. I always make this example of how even if you take someone like Al Gore, he wasn't good at school. He went to Harvard and everything, but he wasn't really good at it. And because of his mediocre academic performance, he then finds something to keep himself busy and then goes on a whole tangent about climate change. It's the exact same it's the exact same strategy that is employed by these blavity bags, that in their failures, they then come around and now try to push a narrative that they are in the situation they are in because of racism, either at a corporate level, etc. There's a lot to be said there. Now, to tie this with what Gabriel said, now I've quite the scorn for firstly academics, and then secondly, particularly radio hosts on talk radio. That is people who have some kind of show and really ruin the experience for someone like me who does enjoy listening to discourse, listening to different opinions, different views, and typically learning a thing or two as well. And that when they run out of topics, that is, when the news cycle isn't as exciting as they would like it to be, that's the exact moment they decide to speak on things such as race. And then they'll find victims on whatever. You know, whether I once listened to a show where the conversation was around how sanitary pads are particularly difficult to obtain for Black people, and what is government doing about that? You have someone basically saying that black people must be given a free pass and they must be effectively at the till, given a discount on sanitary pads because of the economic situation of black people, and of course the shared struggle experienced by a lot of women when they're on their period. It's this kind of conversation that really it takes away from having something that is more meaningful, and it is quite popular in people who then look for race as a vector to drive any form of societal discord. Now they do this because they are experts at nothing, and I'm pointing now specifically at the academics and the radio hosts, etc. They are experts at very few things, and so they can't have constructive discussions around other topics. And then on top of that, they can't invite industry experts on other topics as well, because there's no room for wokeness in industries where your opinion doesn't matter. When it comes to something such as maybe engineering, for example, your opinion doesn't matter, and that's why they don't like to entertain these kind of topical conversations, because they facts trump everything else, innovation trumps everything else, and there's no room for you to then come out and say that, right, it is my blackness that prevents A, B, C from happening. It's the situation we find ourselves in. But to really then come out and tell black people particularly that they are really just agents of some other or higher form of pandering to white people, it does show an argumentative immaturity, if I can put it like that. You expose yourself in that you are unable to engage substance, and therefore you'd rather take on a position of rather calling someone who is black like you, calling them, someone who's basically betraying their race or acting of a different skin color, as if your skin really does have the biggest and the best, the biggest and the best, I would say, indicator of what your ideology should be. It's poor, it's immature, but unfortunately, you see it mostly in those who are supposed to be the brightest of us, that is academics. But of course, you and I have seen otherwise, that in their failure to put forward a valid argument, they would rather just attack the man and ignore everything else he's just said, and rather say that he is simply too privileged or too close in proximity to white things. That is discipline, hard work, and even accent, if it comes down to that, for him to actually have a valid opinion on this and many other things. But again, this is the kind of topics we typically cover on Manpatria, so catch us there if you want to see more of this.
Absolutely. And your fellow co-host is on the screen right now, Unzuzo, with the comment, race merchants trade in ideas race merchants trade in ideas. That's all they offer. Nothing tangible, and still suffer no consequences when all these ideas fail repeatedly. End of quote. That's a comment, of course, from Unzuzo Kati. Kanthan, I'm going to end with you, and maybe we'll end on this topic because we have run out of time. We won't be able to get into Ramaphosa extending the state of disaster. I might see if we have time to do a quick fire on that one. But Kanthan, your views on this, because again, Koketso makes the point. Someone will even listen to my accent, for example, which is just a Durban English school accent, and go, how well, you're not black because you don't speak like this, or you don't say K does, or have an accent like that. And they would literally be very serious in making this argument that you're less black because of things like this, and that I should be the sort of person, as a black individual, who goes around looking for racism and shadow boxing racism, if you will, everywhere. I see racist people, Kanthan. Kanthan, you're muted. The racists have muted you.
People often ask me which country I come from because they have great difficulty placing my accent. And that's kind of a useful thing. But, let's just let's just focus on the question of the extension of the state of disaster. I think that there was no one among us in the entire country who was expecting that there would be anything to the contrary in terms of what the ANC has done. Because something that we know is that once people have been given a sense of power, they will not willingly let go of it. And that has been the pattern over the longest time. The options that are available to us as a country right now, I'm afraid, are very limited, because early on, when we attempted, when I say we, I mean various portions of South African civil society, attempted to challenge the state of disaster regulations in court. We lost. And the reason why we lost is because of the fact that the judiciary in that particular situation kowtowed to authority. And, the person who was instrumental in that particular decision has now been named our Chief Justice for the next 2 years. But the rest of you guys are celebrating the fact that he's been put in place. So I'll park that for now and I won't go back to it. The only point at which this is going to be overturned is going to be... You're welcome. And here's my prop for that. The only point at which it's going to be overturned is in 2024 at the polls. And I'm making a call right now, ladies and gentlemen who are tuned in, that the state of disaster is going to stay with us until such time as the ANC is removed from power.
Well, you're not wrong in the sense of what they're trying to do in shifting it from a state of disaster and basically situating the powers it gave them into the legislation they're pushing now. Guys, I'm going to have to ask everybody to be 30 seconds max, and I will discipline and even switch mics off. Ernst, I want to come to you because AfriForum is one of those organizations that have taken this current extension to court, the strategy and really the premise of why.
Well, luckily, Sikhle, I have to disagree with Kanthan there. He said that everyone saw this coming, that the ANC lies. But I can tell you from AfriForum's perspective, we had a lot of people telling us back in February when we filed our court papers, they're like, what are you doing? The ANC promised they're going to end this the 15th of March. You're wasting your time. You're wasting your money. What are you doing? And I can tell you a lot of people were telling us that. And now here we're sitting in March and, well, look here, the ANC lied once again. It's just it's like that story of the scorpion on the frog's back when he swims over the river, and then the scorpion stings the frog, and the frog says, "But you said you wouldn't sting me," and the scorpion says something along the lines of, "But it's in my nature." Well, it's in the nature of the ANC to lie. That's what the track record proves. But when it comes to this issue, just to finish off there, I agree with Kanthan that the only thing that will stop it is if there's a genuine opposition to it. The balance of forces need to be tipped, and but I do think as long as the ANC are in power, I do agree the state of disaster will be with us, because the ANC being in power is the state of disaster itself for South Africa.
Absolutely. And Bheki, let me come to you, because it would seem to me that politicians have openly basically said, you know what, to hell with you South Africans, to hell with the fact that you're going through a tough time economically because of the state of disaster. We love, the politicians are saying, the state of disaster, the powers that it gives us, to hell with you and your pocketbook. But of course, we know, Bheki, the state of disaster has literally decimated people's incomes and jobs.
Yeah, it is. I believe, Sissi, it's not far-fetched to say that the state of disaster has been by far one of the most disastrous policy that ever came from the ANC since 1994. I mean, just looking at employment numbers currently, even sitting at level 1, where a lot of the restrictions have been lifted, we're still about 2.1 million jobs short compared to 2019. And our current employment numbers are about the same than when Thabo Mbeki left office in 2008. That's staggering. That's 10 years worth of jobs, stagnant growth in jobs, by the way, because of the hostile policies that we've seen over the past decade, being destroyed in a matter of 2 years. I mean, it's now at 723 days of lockdown, going to the third year of the country being in lockdown. And the consequences of this are being paid for by average South Africans, as you mentioned there, Sisha. Like, for example, looking at GDP per capita, our current GDP per capita now is also lower than when it was in 2008. And there's been current talk that the country is recovering from the pandemic when you look at the latest GDP figure of 4.9%. But these indicators, such as employment, such as income numbers, do not suggest that. Unfortunately, that is not the case. And this is the thing that the ANC needs to be held accountable for, that the destruction in jobs, the destruction in incomes has been paid for by ordinary South Africans. This is something, unfortunately, that policymakers do not pay the price for their policy decisions.
Yes, we're out of time. I wanted to unpack that because really, I think this is where most South Africans really feel the state of disaster. They don't feel it in the announcements and the family meetings and all that nonsense that Buffalo Bill or Cyril Ramaphosa announced. Koketso, I want to come to you and I'll give Gabriel the last word. We almost felt a sense of dejection, didn't we? When, Kanthan on the one hand says he expected it, Adams rightly says others didn't expect it, but when it did happen, after the president had initially said, "That's it, choops, we're done." That was the last previous one. That was the last state of disaster. We're not going to extend this thing anymore. And then he comes out guns blazing in Parliament today. In fact, I want to play that clip. I'm sorry, I have to play that clip because I did clip it here. Just give me a second here, guys. This is the president effectively partially walking back the fact that he had said it's going to end, now saying, I need to play it safe in order to end this destructive policy.
To see the state of disaster coming to an end. But I'm not going to be reckless. I am not going to be reckless. I am going to be orderly. I'm going to be orderly, and in days, I'm going to address the nation and explain precisely where we are headed to and how we should traverse this new route that we are going on. So we will outline precisely. Now, the regulations have been published, the health regulations, and there are processes that we are engaging with various leaders and so on. We've met traditional leaders, we've met various other leaders, as well as religious leaders, talking precisely about this. And I can assure you again, Honorable Steenhuisen, we are going to lift the state of disaster. We are, Nini, soon. And we are going to put in place health regulations. Regulations that will enable everyone to feel safe. But at the same time, we want to boost vaccination.
As in Zulu, we have a nice expression that says, because really, suddenly the whole narrative has shifted and changed, chopped and changed to suit them. Suddenly now we end this SOD because we need a higher vaccination rate or it's not safe. Okay, so I want to whittle this down because we only have a few seconds. This dangerous tone we're hearing from politicians around the world of your safety matters to us really has seen them introduce very draconian laws in the name of keeping us safe. I want Justin Trudeau also plays that game, for example.
Yeah, so the president sounded very assertive there when he said we are going to introduce measures to public health and safety, which is exactly what they're trying to do. And I'm glad that there are individuals and organizations who are trying to put a stop to this. But yeah, effectively what the president is saying is he's been on speed with One China quite a bit recently, Maduro as well. And of course, they're friends at Cuba, and they're effectively just trying to say that that's his way of basically saying that I've received some solid advice from my friends, and yeah, we have decided as a party, as a government, that South Africa will join the list of countries who live under authoritarian rule. That's exactly what he's saying. He doesn't want to use those words, of course, but by implication, that's exactly what he's doing, and he's not mincing his words. So this needs to go down as a fight, right down to the ballot if necessary. But first things first, via the courtrooms. And shout out to AfriForum, Sakilicha, and a couple of others that are picking up that fight,
including about the SA. Shout out to
and
them, man.
USA,
Great,
yeah.
excellent work. Excuse me, Gabriel. Let me give you the final word on this one. And really, I want you to wrap it up for us because someone might be, and I want to hop on that last point I made, this shift in language of politicians arguing that their role is to, quote unquote, keep us safe from a virus that has a 99% recovery rate worldwide, 96% recovery rate in this country, and just the sort of laws that stem from the safetyism ideology.
Look, I, since October, have found myself in the position where some of my friends called me Lieutenant Anti-Lockdown because we have run a petition. And it, we've got 25,000 people or so who've signed up to our campaigns against the lockdown and the state of disaster, the command council vaccine mandate. If you add it all up over over the period, the 2-year period that this thing is playing, over 60,000 petitions. And I think this is important for the following reason. I am the greater fool. I was not convinced by Ramaphosa's statements. I was convinced by Joe Phahla's statements. I think most South Africans need to remember Zweli Mkhize has left as the health minister. We've got a new health minister. And that health minister has kind of followed the track of every IRR press statement we've made this year in coming out to say, look, people are making arguments to say this command council has to go. People are making statements to say this lockdown has to go. Civil society is pushing against this thing, and it includes all of us. And we respect that, and we need to, respect that. And when, at some stage last week, he said, we're going to consult the command council and tell them that they need to go away because we don't need them anymore. I said to my friend who called me, I said, we've had a great victory. We've actually beaten the command council because now the Department of Health is saying we don't need a state of disaster. Now that pretty much all of the country's top independent medical experts, and you can go through their names, are saying we don't need a state of disaster. It must be done. And this friend said, yes, if the Department of Health and the experts are saying we don't need a disaster, we don't need a command council, who is the command council to disagree? So it seemed like we had a victory, and I believed we had a victory because I was even more stupid than the stupid leader of the command council who didn't realize that the whole Department of Health, the whole body of evidence, the whole universe of experts have said we don't need you anymore. They have decided they are still needed. On what basis? On the basis that there are regulations that need to be transferred permanently to ban rugby games and soccer games and cricket matches forever, to impose masks forever, and so on and so forth. It is a craziness. It's a craziness that really did take me by surprise. We are very keen to join the fight, partly on the basis that this idea that they didn't think about it until now. So now they want to end the command council, but introduce the new regulations, and only now they've started to think about how they do it. We can show through our legal correspondence with the presidency and the Minister of Koketso that they did not just think about it, because we were discussing it with them in October. We can show that the rationale is irrational once again, just like when they tried to take away our election last year. Every South African had a right to vote last year in 2021. And Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma did not want you to have that right. And she was deemed to be irrational by the Constitutional Court. And if they keep pushing this thing, all of the parties that are climbing in are going to show that she is irrational again. And this time it is going to be even more damning because Ramaphosa has put his weight behind it because there is clearly no benefit to it. And the harm is intolerable. Insofar as the ANC wants to follow Moscow, they've lifted the masks. Insofar as the ANC wants to follow London, they've lifted the masks. We have tracked 24 countries that have lifted every single regulation that the ANC purports to look up to. It is time to give citizens back what they want. But for citizens that are watching this, that time only comes when you stand up. The government, and this is where maybe I've been disagreeing, this is where I agree with what everyone else has said. It's not going to happen unless we fight for it, and we must fight for it. And Sihle, if we do have to go do a march or a ride around or anything like that, I hope you and I can find ourselves somewhere in the vicinity.
Absolutely. As that famous song went, I want to be there, and we'll be there. With that being said, I must end the show right here and right now with a big thank you to all my guests. Guys, quick fire, how do the folks find you on your socials? Adams, how do we find you?
Well, quick fire. So you can just find me at Conscious Caracal. You can find me on Twitter and on YouTube. I do political analysis on both those platforms, and I do interviews as well on YouTube. And then you can also support AfriForum by becoming a member if you're not one already, because that's my employer, where I'm the campaigns officer for strategy and content.
Absolutely. Massive shout out to the boys and the fellas and the ladies over at From. See what I did there? We just had an episode on trans. Had to get the gender right. Gabriel, how do we find you? Your socials and of course the show.
I don't social, but I do. Look, please, irr.org.za. Go there. You'll see our campaigns. IRR campaigns are very important to me. That's what I try and lead. Check out the Daily Friend. You will see news, opinion, commentary. It's amazing how much good content gets produced that unfortunately gets overlooked elsewhere. But it's there. It's free to air. So go check it out.
Yes.
Thank you.
And of course, Kanthan, how do the folks find you, Putwami? Are you still vlogging, or rather, pardon me, blogging daily?
Every single day since the 1st of January, without exception. Some days are a bit more esoteric, but if you look in terms of the stuff that I was talking about around the Nazis in Ukraine, what's been going down behind the scenes, all of that kind of stuff, there has been a blog on that on almost every day. So kanthanpillay.com is where you'll find me. If you want to get hold of me, then just basically find me on Twitter, find me on Getter, find me on Parler, find me on Gab, find me on LinkedIn. I'm Kanthan Pillay on all of those.
There you go. That's the super Kanthan Pillay. Bheki, how do the folks find you if you want to be found on social media?
Yeah, I also don't do the socials, but in terms of CRA work, our articles are also posted on Daily Friend, so visit the Daily Friend. Also check out the CRA website, Center for Risk Analysis. Also, our analysis was also shown on YouTube when you search for the Center for Risk Analysis on YouTube, where you will get our daily analysis.
Very
and
nice.
if you're a business person, sign up to the Center for Risk Analysis. You
Yes.
get briefings from Bheki personally that are very detailed and amazing. I've sat in on them; they're very good.
Thank you,
very
Gabriel.
nice. In that regard, last but not least, Koketso, how do the folks find you, and what's on Manpatria tomorrow?
So yeah, first things first, it's a public holiday, so we will not be Manpatria. We will do the podcast on Tuesday. So Tuesday, 7 p.m. Usual time is Monday at 7 p.m. But yeah, we understand you guys want to braai the whole day. We will give you that. Yeah, we'll be covering maybe some overlap with some of these topics as well. Dumo will be joining me as well as Nzuzo. In terms of where to find me for now, hit me up on Twitter. That is Koketso Resane. Yes, I use real name and surname. And yes, I do bite back to all the wokies out there. They know themselves.
Warning heard and received. I'm sure left is going, oh, hey, where my daughter? This is slow man. With that being said, a massive thank you to every single one of my guests as I get them off the screen. There is Kanthan, goodbye, and say thank you, dear viewer, for watching. As always, you guys rock. Please hit that like button on your way out if you want to support the work of the BDL show as we do some really awesome stuff. Hey man, you'll find all of those details in the descriptor of this video. Massive thank you to you once again for watching, and a reminder, as I always say, actually before that, do you guys like the new setup? I'm using a nice new crisp camera there. I think it's a little bit out of focus though. But it's your contributions that are helping me buy new equipment. So I really am appreciative to you guys as we continue that work of perhaps putting up a nice little studio for the show. Guys, some really exciting stuff, and you'll hear more about that a little later. But with that being said, let me stop waffling and say and remind you, as I do at the end of every show, never trust a commie.